If Kirk Cousins really is on his way out, who's going to replace him? What if it's not a rookie? Let's go over some options on Locked On Vikings.
You like that? 3, 1, 2, 3. You like it?
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much to those of you who listen to this show every single day. My hashtag everydayers. I appreciate y'all so very much, and I appreciate you guys sticking with me, but I also appreciate everybody who is new, who's coming in. I think a lot of people are actually probably tuning in right about now as free agency is going to open next week, trying to get their head wrapped around some things. So you've come to the right place. We'll make sure that you're all caught up on everything that is going on all off season long. Daily podcast, of course, that you can find anywhere you find your favorite podcasts, whether it is anywhere where you listen to podcasts like the Sirius XM app. You can also search out any sports team and find hometown radio broadcasts of live games. So search out Timberwolves for Timberwolves games and so on. You can also find the show on YouTube or Amazon Fire and Roku. Just download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So we're going to be a little bit redundant in these next couple of days for the hashtag everydayers, those of you who have been with me. But that's okay. This is how things are going to go. And I'm sure we're going to start having contract news and stuff to cover. Some of that stuff might break over the weekend, in which case we'll just get to it on Monday. But here's where things stand. Kirk Cousins is pretty brazenly talking to other teams. It seems like the Vikings have given him the blessing to do that. And it seems like Atlanta has given Kirk Cousins an offer, and we are waiting to see if Minnesota is going to match that offer. And it kind of feels like they're not really leaning toward it, but minds can change at the last minute. And also I could be just like wrong about that assessment. So let's not dwell on it. I've done 2 straight shows talking rumor mill. Enough. Let's talk about who the Vikings could have at quarterback if it's not Kirk Cousins. Because here's the rub. If you let Kirk Cousins walk, you're not really going to want to roll into the draft with Nick Mullins and Jaren Hall. You don't want that to be your fallback. You want to fall back for what if the Vikings get sniped? What if they don't get the QB they want? What if they do get the QB they want, but that guy's not ready week 1? This is your bridge quarterback, right? But I'm not talking about the sort of Andy Dalton type bridge quarterbacks that, you know, you only really want starting for 6 weeks, like when Justin Fields was first in Chicago. I'm not talking about that kind of thing. I'm talking about like veteran quarterback names that at some point or other have been linked to the Vikings that we maybe should discuss. And by at some point or another, I mean like in the last week. There's been some report or other. So the 3 guys we are going to go over today are Justin Fields, Baker Mayfield, and Russell Wilson. All 3 very unlikely scenarios for one reason or another, but all 3 represent a sort of a different tier than like Jacoby Brissett or Gardner Minshew, where those guys are really in there to be a high-end backup and a safety plan in case something goes wrong. If you bring in Baker Mayfield or Justin Fields or Russell Wilson, you are able to sort of look in the mirror and say, we have a serious quarterback. I'll use the word a serious quarterback. Is he a contender? Probably not, but maybe we are attempting to do something serious. But are these guys serious? So let's start with Justin Fields. And the report, I believe, came from Jeremy Fowler, ESPN Insider stuff. ESPN Insider has been flying all kinds of things flying around. So what they said was it was about the Bears, and it was talking about how they're super locked into Caleb Williams and they're trying to move Justin Fields. The ESPN apparatus has been very unified in what they have reported here. with the Bears and Justin Fields, which is that they wanted to trade him and they just did not find the market they thought they would find. So they're trying to find a way to get some return on it. Remember, Chicago spent 2 first-round picks on this guy. And he's not even making it to the end of his rookie contract. He's getting traded before year 4. They're trying to like at least recoup something, right? And if they get a conditional 6th is a pretty disappointing outcome for them. So they're trying to figure out a way to perhaps drum up some interest. And I think with that comes letting reports get out there, right? So one of the reports, I think this was Jeremy Fowler, said, here are the teams that have been interested. And it was like the usual suspects like Atlanta, New England, Pittsburgh, and Minnesota. That was it. It was like a passing mention. But it's enough to at least say, okay, what would this be like? So here's the deal with Justin Fields. I have a complicated relationship with the idea of Justin Fields because I loved him coming out. I loved him in the draft, and I was actually super heartbroken when I realized he was going to a division rival. And I was very relieved when that division rival bungled it horribly and ruined him. That's how it'll go down in history, probably, at least. Whether you think that's fair or not. So this is sort of a case of damaged goods. I see like Sam Darnold in kind of a similar category, which I don't mean to be quite as damning as that sounds, but I don't 100% not mean that. This dude's broken. I think that's where my brain is at with Justin Fields. And we could get into the more of the nitty gritty. And if he does end up being a Viking someday, then we will. But his reaction time in the pocket has always been a little bit too fast, a little bit too skittish, a little bit too quick to break the play. And that was the thing at Ohio State. And then he gets to Chicago, and they just reinforced that by putting him behind a completely unserious offensive line. His best receiver is like Darnell Mooney for 2 years. It finally got him DJ Moore, and that helped some. But, as good as DJ Moore is, he does not make an offense in and of himself, right? Justin Fields kind of can be. But what Chicago ended up doing was, over the course of the season, they leaned further and further into QB runs. And they said, what if we just kind of like made this the thing? And instead of trying to, have a drop back quarterback that can scramble, instead of trying to make this dude be Mahomes, what if he's Kyler Murray? And Kyler Murray can just play a bunch of read option and be an integral part of the run game. And that worked out a lot better for Chicago. And Chicago kind of got hot at the end of the season. They caught the Vikings. The Vikings still ended up above them on tiebreakers, but like they made up a pretty big deficit at the end of the season as the Vikings fell apart with no backup quarterback too. So to the Bears' credit, they found something that maybe would have worked. So there's a bunch of moving parts here. One is, would the Bears even pick up the phone if they saw Minnesota calling about Justin Fields? And I kind of feel like no. Like, I get that in division trades, like that especially with the Vikings and Kwesi, he's like more willing to do that, and the NFC North is more willing to do that nowadays than usual. But it feels like trading the guy that like we thought was our franchise quarterback to you is like the last of those dominoes to fall. Like we'll do a draft trade, right? We'll trade, in division role players or something like that. But like the quarterback, the face of the franchise is what he's like on all the posters, I think, still up around Chicago. So I don't know if that guy gets traded in the division. I like that's a barrier, but let's just assume that I'm wrong there and that the Bears are absolutely just like willing to do it. Then you talk about what compensation is. In my opinion, at least, it doesn't sound like they're getting day 2 capital. That is really disappointing to them. But I'm looking at like the Trey Lance trade, right? 4th round pick goes to Dallas. And I believe the reporting surrounding that was that most teams were offering later day 3 picks, and Dallas came in and kind of blew everybody, the whole market away with a 4th. So like, that's what we're talking about here. And I think Justin Fields, because those habits got exacerbated and he essentially turned into a quarterback that is, he's kind of got to be a running quarterback to be a starting quarterback. Like, is that, like, that might be the world we're in with Justin Fields. And that might also be the world we're in with Trey Lance. Those guys aren't necessarily like starters. I don't know if Justin Fields gets a starting job here. Look, maybe he ends up in Pittsburgh and he'll like compete with Kenny Pickett, but what if he doesn't win that competition? That is an actual outcome that we have to like be respectful of when we're projecting this kind of stuff. So this is like a day 3 pick. So the compensation wise, I don't see it. You got to decide on his 5th year option like right away. But I imagine that if you're trading for him, you probably want that extra year. So you're probably just going to say yes to it. And then the sort of last component here is, do we feel like this guy is the guy, or are we still drafting a guy? And for me, if the Vikings rolled into 2024 with Justin Fields just like as the anointed starter, and then they like drafted an edge rusher or something like that, I'd probably be railing pretty hard against it. That just doesn't seem to be respectful enough of the struggles we've seen over the last 3 years. But Justin Fields has a PR thing that all these quarterbacks that come in with like hashtag potential have. I remember it happened with Sam Darnold, like 3-4 years in, this dude is nuts. Like, he's bad. But we're still saying, but he's young and he's got potential. We're past that with Darnold, and I think in 2 years we might be talking this way about Fields, and that's a bummer to me because I really liked him coming out. And I think if he did succeed, even though it would have been with a rival, he still would have been a really fun guy to watch. I don't know. He's a reclamation project. Doesn't work, but could be fun to fix. What do you pay for that? Probably not much. They also might not have to pay a lot for Russell Wilson. But what about Baker Mayfield too? Is that going to be expensive? Let's move on to the next guy. Coming up next. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook. FanDuel is a fantastic way to get yourself started with a good old gamble. You can bet on NFL draft props and stuff. You can, if you really want to be crazy, you can try to bet on which quarterback will be a Viking. J.J. McCarthy was the favorite for the Vikings the Vikings were the favorite to land J.J. McCarthy for a couple of weeks. Now it's the Giants, as stuff has come out of New York that says that they've got buyer's remorse with Daniel Jones or whatever it is. Or you could try to bet on something like halfway normal, like a basketball game, odds, spreads, live, same game parlays, that kind of thing. And if you are new, you can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 if your bet wins at FanDuel.com/LockedOn. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Thanks a million for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day, each and every day. If you were not here many weeks ago when we talked about all of the college quarterbacks, the draft prospects from Caleb Williams down to Penix and Nix, you can go find those shows, or you can go to patreon.com/LukeBrownNFL, where I have film breakdowns of the top 6 draft quarterbacks, all free to watch, and edge rusher, defensive line stuff will come up in a patrons only aspect soon. Working on those right now. Let's move on to Baker Mayfield and the situation with Baker Mayfield. So I asked David Harrison on Locked On NFL what the deal is with Baker Mayfield, because we were talking about Mike Evans. I was on the show the day that Mike Evans re-signed with Tampa Bay. So we were talking about Tampa Bay's situation. And David Harrison covered the Bucs on Locked On Bucs for like 6 years. He now does only Locked On Commanders. He used to do both shows. So now he's on just the one, but he's still like very, very plugged in with Tampa Bay. So it's a good perspective. And also just go listen to James Yarcho, who's now solo on Locked On Bucs. But the vibe in Tampa Bay is that they really want Baker Mayfield to be back. The like void year acceleration dead cap thing is like $2 million. It's like nothing. It's a much different situation than like Kirk Cousins. When his deal is scheduled to void, that will become a $28.5 million dead cap hit. So to re-sign him after that day, you don't get any of the benefits of spreading that back out. Like, that is now just locked in. It might as well be a $28.5 million dead cap hit assigned to me. It has nothing to do with Kirk Cousins' new contract anymore. It's just a totally new thing, just like slapped on top of it. That makes it really hard to do, right? Because if you sign him to say $30 million a year, suddenly that's a $58.5 million cap hit that is tied up into the charge of one player. That's fairly unrealistic. But with Baker Mayfield, if it's just $2 million higher, like who cares? It's nothing. So Tampa still wants him back a lot. And I think everybody in the world sort of is anticipating that he just goes back to Tampa. And where I stand on this, and again, if you listen to Locked On NFL on Tuesdays when I'm there, I've talked about Baker Mayfield a lot on there and how his like resurgence in Tampa Bay feels like exactly what Tampa needs. Tampa's in a weird spot where they have enough talent, and they've won the division 3 years running now, where they have a lot of incentives to try to keep the band together, especially, coming off of the really good Brady years and the Super Bowl there, but also like that wasn't a team of scrubs around Brady. And they still have a lot of those players in the building. So drafting a young quarterback and trying to like apply the required patience while that guy develops, while they've got a fairly old roster that's sort of ready in the short term, but doesn't have that long term. Like that's where the Buccaneers are. And that's what I think is different, where like the core of the Vikings, for example, Justin Jefferson's young, TJ Hawkinson's 27, Darisaw is young. Like they have their core players are not like all in their 30s, but with the Bucs, those core players are a little older. So buying into a rookie quarterback, it's just the timing is weird, and not to mention that the fact that they won a playoff game, so they're way down in the draft order, which can be resolved, right? They could still just like take Penix and try, but it just doesn't feel like the world where they're at, especially because for Baker, he played well and the team rallied around him. I think that's a really important factor here that's not going to show up on anyone's stat sheet, that the team really bought in with Baker Mayfield, and they won the division doing that when they just weren't even supposed to sniff it. They were supposed to be drafting top 5 this year, and they ended up winning their division over, New Orleans and Atlanta as those teams fell apart with QB injuries and such. But what I'm getting at here is that Tampa's in the perfect spot for Baker Mayfield specifically. Where not only is he somebody that their locker room has already bought into and believes in, but he also represents a sort of let's run this back for 2 years, but not more than 2 years. And that's exactly where they need to be. Whereas the Vikings, I think, are looking for a solution that's a little bit more long-term. Or they're looking for a solution that's mega short-term. That's just, hey, the first couple weeks of our rookie quarterback. So Baker fits what Tampa is doing more than he fits what the Vikings are doing. That said, yeah, there's all kinds of whispers floating around. I mean, I think you could find the Vikings connected with just about any name. They're a team that obviously needs a quarterback. They don't have one under contract right now. So they're going to be linked to every name, from Baker to Justin Fields to every rookie to even, a return to Kirk Cousins, I guess you would call it a name in free agency, until that is otherwise, until that is made to not be the case. But for me, with Baker, that leadership took a step forward in a way that I don't think he had. It doesn't sound like, at least, that he had in Cleveland, or even when he was in like Carolina. It seemed like something clicked here in a way that it didn't click, except for maybe that like 1 year in 2020 when the Browns won a playoff game with Baker. Like that might be it. And so because of that and the season that he had, and I think winning a playoff game and being a team in the divisional round, going toe to toe with the Lions for most of that game too, like they've proved something about themselves. And I think Tampa's going to want to keep that together, but it also means Baker Mayfield's going to have a market. Baker is not going to have the Sam Darnold, I just hope I get on a roster thing. I think he's going to have a market if Tampa does decide that they're going to go elsewhere with this. You're not going to get Baker Mayfield for cheap, and I don't think you're going to get Baker Mayfield for a short-term deal. If you're getting Baker, I think you're doing like 3 years for 30 per or something like that, like a significant amount of money. Now, 30 ain't what it used to be, right? Like he would probably be getting out earned by Justin Jefferson. He wouldn't even be the highest paid player on the team, but that's still like pretty significant, right? And what that represents is a commitment. So we would be committing to Baker Mayfield. It doesn't feel like the team that is head over heels for a couple of the quarterbacks in the draft and that has been pushing really hard to trade up to number 3. If all the combine rumors are to be believed, of course, grain of salt, lying season, all that. But with all of those factors, it doesn't really feel like this is the team that's going to go into a 3-year stint with a quarterback that is kind of going to be an okay point guard, which is where I think Baker's at in his career. He plays smart. He's a veteran. He knows what he can and can't get away with. And ultimately there are games where it's just going to have to be like up to Mike Evans to take over and win. You know what I mean? I think Tampa's set up for that because Tampa's not looking at getting a rookie. So they can say, hey, let's see if this Baker Mayfield thing works out, Like you could put Baker Mayfield on a team and just have Justin Jefferson like be the guy and he can dish it out to Justin Jefferson just fine. Like that can work out fine, but not if you're trying to draft a guy. And the Vikings are trying really hard to draft a guy. You don't want to use 3 years of his rookie contract on Baker. It's a different situation than if you have like Aaron Rodgers winning MVPs, So I don't see it with Baker Mayfield. I think that the situation just doesn't line up. But what about the situation with Russell Wilson? A, what's going on there? B, can he even play? And C, does that mean that he is a Viking? Let's talk about that next. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by eBay Motors. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance, whether that is something cosmetic like an LED light or one of those like lights, those floor lights that shine underneath or something cool like that, or something under the hood that you actually need to get from point A to point B. eBay Motors understands that your car is specific to you and it is an extension of who you are and the way that you live your life. They have over 122 million parts for that car, and you'll always find exactly what you're looking for, and it will fit your car or your money back. That is the eBay guaranteed fit. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into that extension of yourself that it really should be. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay guaranteed fit only available to U.S. customers. Onward and upward? I guess downward, because we're talking about Russell Wilson next. And boy, you could interpret that a couple of ways, and they're all true. It's been a rough week for Russell Wilson and for the Broncos. That was the other thing I talked about on Locked On NFL, by the way. It's just how bleak things look for the Broncos right now with the state of their roster and the dead cap hit they're incurring. $85 million over 2 years, my goodness. But here's where we stand with Russell Wilson. He's a free agent. He is free to negotiate with whoever. You may have heard things about offset language. You may be confused about those things. Let me clear up what's going on here. So Russell Wilson carries a $39 million cap hit for Denver if he stayed on the roster. He is not staying on the roster, and so some stuff moves around over there. Listen to Locked On Broncos for that. But what we need to know is that 17 mil of that is in fully guaranteed base salary with offset language, and 22 mil of that is in signing bonus. So that 22 mil doesn't have anything to do with his new team. You can ignore it. It's that 17 million of guaranteed base salary that has offset language in it. What offset language means is that if he signs with the Vikings or whatever his new team is, whatever money he makes in the first year of that contract comes out of that 17 mil that the Broncos are on the hook for. So let's say Russell Wilson doesn't sign anywhere. The Broncos still pay him 17 million because they guaranteed that 17 million and they pay him to sit on the couch. That's a pretty unlikely scenario. So let's say he does sign with Minnesota and he gets paid $10 million. Then Minnesota pays him that $10 million salary and he still collects $7 million from the Broncos. Just coming out of their pockets still. So the way this has been reported, Tom Pelissero kind of hinted at this, and this is what the league seems to think is the move, is that Russell Wilson will make the veteran minimum and collect $17 million this year from the Broncos and be happy with that. He'll take his 17 mil and say, my paycheck is 17 mil this year, and you can just pay me whatever the minimum is. The minimum for him is, I think, going to be in the 2 millions because he's been in the league a long time. But essentially, this is a cheap option. Now, here's the rub. He's kind of he's bad. And he's been bad for 2 years. I think he's kind of cooked. I think that's just what it is. The olden days of Russell Wilson moonballs, and even like the 2016, 2017, not even the glory days of the 2013 Super Bowl run, but like the 2017-ish Russell Wilson moonball days, kind of over. That said, he's a veteran, and this would maybe be akin to, and please don't be too hurt that I'm bringing this up, akin a little bit to Donovan McNabb being a Viking for 5 games in 2011. I think he does kind of fall into that same category as like Jacoby Brissett. Like I would sort of have the same reaction where I go, okay, I hope that guy doesn't have to play too many games, but I'm all right with it for a little bit. He does not represent a long-term commitment in the way that Fields and Baker Mayfield would. You know, if you're trading for Justin Fields, and if the Bears let you do that, you're doing that because you think you can fix him, right? Because you think that whatever happened with him in Chicago is not going to be repeated here. Kevin O'Connell's going to quiet his mind. Josh McCown, as this QB coach, is going to figure him out. You're putting your faith in that and thinking maybe this guy's a long-term QB and we just have to pour a little bit of TLC into his development. And with Baker Mayfield, you're saying we're taking this guy for who he is, and we're going to give him a 2 to 3 year window to see what we can put together with him throwing to Justin Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson once he's healthy, and et cetera, et cetera. With Russell Wilson, you're going, yeah, man, we just kind of need somebody that understands how to read a playbook to keep the seat warm until our rookie knows our playbook. Like that's where we're going with Russell Wilson, and you'd be paying him for that. You'd be paying him the veteran minimum. So as much as Russell Wilson is a name that doesn't feel like a veteran minimum guy, like if you took the nameplate off of him and you see the quality of quarterback you would get for the veteran minimum, probably a pretty good deal. I just don't want him to start that many games because I don't think that wins many games. And like I spoke about, I think on Friday's show, the point of a bridge quarterback is to keep you in it so that your rookie QB's first year can be a year where you have a chance. You don't want him to take over on a 1-7 team and say, well, that was just a developmental year. We just kind of punted one away. It's just, that's the whole point of him, is to just not punt one away. And yeah, you probably will still, you'll be the 4th seed and you still got to make a weird run, and it's still unlikely, but it's possible. And all you can ever ask for in the NFL is an opportunity, not a likely one. You never get a likely one, but you still need to get one. And that maybe would be what Russell Wilson does. So of all these ideas, Russell Wilson is the one that makes the most sense, even though I don't think he's the best quarterback in this group. And I don't think he's the best quarterback available for that role by any stretch of the imagination. But of these three, I suppose he's the one that is the most logical, I guess. But I wouldn't hold your breath on any of these things. I mean, I don't know. Russ could, because he is a free agent, and he it is the kind of cap exploitative thing that Kwesi tends to gravitate toward, the guy that, represents a high floor and a low ceiling, a high ceiling and a low floor. And maybe will come at a discount and represents an opportunity to turn a profit. Like that's his way of thinking about these things. And that kind of lines up with Russell Wilson, but it's not anything that would make anybody jump for joy. What it would do is, if you go into the draft, it would give you a negotiating platform that doesn't look desperate. You can bluff, they will still want to draft a quarterback really, really bad, but you can bluff about it. And you can say, I don't know about that offer. Maybe we just do a year with Russell Wilson and come back here next time. Unless you want to, take that 4th round pick off of there, then we'll do it. You can do that kind of conversation, but you can't do that if you're going, well, if we don't draft JJ McCarthy, we got Nick Mullins for a year. You don't want to be in that spot. So we'll see what happens here. We're still very much on Kirk Cousins' watch. I'm waiting for the Schefter tweet that tells us what's going to happen here, because it does feel like it's going to get reported before it actually occurs. We had a lot of franchise tag, deadline stuff, none of that really applied to the Vikings. I should mention they re-signed Nick Muse as an exclusive rights free agent. That isn't huge news. That was very much to be expected. He costs less than $1 million and by camp might not even count toward the top 51 contracts, which means his salary won't even count until he makes the team, if he even makes the team. He's the third tight end under contract now, so technically they have a full room. Once TJ Hawkinson is back, although still wouldn't hold your breath for him being ready by the beginning of the season. So that's all a conversation for another day when we're way past all of this free agency and the draft stuff. For now, buckle your seatbelts because it's about to get spicy. I will see you guys all tomorrow, and as always, Skol.